Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Iron Man 3. So, are you ready for another lesson? God. I'm a terrorist. You can consider me a terrorist. I think of myself as a teacher. Are you ready for another lesson? So, we go into this film, and the one thing that immediately I think about when I think about this film is I now realize that Far From Home technically stole the idea of the villain of this movie. They basically stole the fact that it's like, well, hey, the villain in Far From Home is just like the villain in Iron Man 3. Because everybody was to get excited about the Mandarin. Everyone was like, yeah, this sounds really cool. It seems like they're putting in Extremis, and this, like, Extremis is like a really cool, like, Iron Man thing to put in here. And I just feel like a lot of this stuff, a lot of this movie was just wasted. Really, like, we have a lot of things just like, man, this is just so disappointing when it's the whole entire film and you're seeing Robert Downey Jr. through a bulk of this film, because of course you are, because Robert Downey Jr. was to go on and say, well, hey, if I'm going to actually be in the Iron Man suit in this movie, then I'm gone. Then if you have the Iron Man suit, I'm gone. So, like, this is great, because then I don't have to be in a good portion of this film. Once you have me in the suit, I'm gone. And so, now they have to create a film that is to have so much Robert Downey Jr. without there being the Iron Man suit, even though Tony Stark is to have a number of Iron Man suits in this movie, which go on to eventually list things like Igor, Blue Steel, Bones, Shotgun, Red Snapper, Heartbreaker, Silver Sentry. There's probably, I think, one other, probably Iron Man suit that I still don't know the name of. I think it's like Stryker or something like that. It's to be a kind of weird, goofy, silverish looking one that is have, I think, these kind of like drills at the end of its arms that I think at some point does try to fight Aldrich Killian's character at some point at the end of the film, as I question that. But I'm sure there's probably some other Iron Man suit that I probably forgot about there. So, man, that's going to be great to have to just memorize all these names and all of this stuff. Then on top of that, like, oh yeah, do you want to also have to memorize all the Iron Man suits, because there's quite a cluster of them in a huge, massive battle towards the end of this film? No. Can we just skip around all that? But yeah, I can say that I have fun with this movie, but it's also, like, on top of it, a disappointing thing that we're probably never going to get a Tony Stark Iron Man movie again after this film. And so, because I would have loved to have this character go back and do solo missions. It's his own story, instead of having him forcibly be incorporated in every single Avengers thing. And even though they possibly cater and say, well, but this is technically an Iron Man villain in this Avengers story, like, it's obviously tied to him and blah blah blah. I'm like, so, like, I want an Iron Man solo film. I want him back on his own, instead of having him just being incorporated forcibly into a team every single film after this. It's just, like, it's just that's the one just disappointing thing where it's sad because at one point Robert Downey Jr. was going on some show somewhere, maybe it was in Ellen or some kind of something, and telling everybody, "Hey guys, there's gonna be an Iron Man 4," and everybody was like losing their minds. They're like, "Oh my god, there's gonna be an Iron Man 4? Oh my god, oh!" And then there never was an Iron Man 4. Everybody's like, "When is there gonna be an Iron Man?" And it never happened. Uh, I'm wondering if there's going to be at some point a change up kind of thing that eventually is to give us forcibly a Iron Man, and because eventually we're probably going to get some kind of Iron Heart or some kind of something where we still have that whole kid situation, and eventually once you see several Avengers movies, you'll know what I'm talking about. But we have we have some fun in this film but there's just a lot of just I want more Iron Man in this film. There's also just a lot of like slowing this movie down a lot and not really giving us the best effort as far as this extremist story where we really just have these extremist characters just consistently having these malfunctions, and then the Mandarin is coming off and covering up like, "I did that, ready for another lesson, Mr. President Ellis, better watch out for your vice president, So with that said, I think that's all that I want to say. So it's kind of a bittersweet film. It's a fun film. There's lines that people will pull out of this, like I was thinking about the first mouse, and so on and so forth. Like there's a lot of stuff to have fun with this movie. Like there are still jokes that still land within this film because when you go on to other kind of certain films with Marvel, you've eventually seen a movie so many freaking times that you're kind of expecting jokes and you don't laugh anymore. Where with an Iron Man movie, like the jokes are still funny. Like when going into a movie that has like Tom Holland's Spider-Man, like you're supposed to laugh at that character, but if anything, I don't. Like I don't find that Spider-Man funny, and because like whatever they use as a humor thing to be like, hey, do you guys know about that one Star Wars movie, the one where they did this about like, and I guess that's a laughing thing where we have the kid who like had seen a Star Wars thing, but he doesn't actually know what it actually is. And so he's like telling them the plan and they're having to figure it out like, oh yeah, like I know exactly what he's talking about because because we're going to tie that in here. But here's the thing, like Tom Holland, I guess, never watched a movie besides Star Wars. And so when we have like Far From Home, like Nick Fury is saying it's like, oh, you probably won't get that reference because it's not a Star Wars thing. I guess Tom Holland has to be a vicious Star Wars fan because that's all I guess he can be, I guess. So maybe at one point I think he did reference Alien or the Sigourney Weaver movie Aliens. But anyways, so let's go into that double five time territory. Let's just go into the spoilers of this movie. So my grading of this movie is I have a lot of fun with this film. Even though there was just more that I wanted out of it, I can still consistently go back into this film and have fun with it because it's a Christmas film, and this is, of course, the last possible Iron Man film, and you can still always have fun with this character, even though it's not enough Iron Man for me in this film. So with that said, I am going to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. So probably the grading would have to be like a passable Iron Man film. Uh, no, like it would have to be more than that. It would. I would say that this is a okay Iron Man film, and it should be way higher than that. It should be like, oh no, it should be at least a solid good film, or it should be a great Iron Man film. I don't know, like I just want there to have been more Iron Man, and there is some funny jokes in here, but like I would just rather say that the other two Iron Man are probably just better than this one, even though because they just they just don't use the villains all that well. They don't use the Iron Man suit that well. They 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 kind of drag this movie out. And so with that said, that's my gradings of this movie. So let's go into spoilers. So spoilers of this one. So we of course end up getting the very beginning of this film, and I'm kind of worried about. Oh, I'm kind of worried about my battery life of my phone. Uh, Battery's going kind of wonky for the phone right now, so hoping that we're eventually gonna get some pretty well charges at some point. But this is also the first video off of today, and I'm like, oh my god, my phone's almost about to die right now. Hopefully, I have something easy and quick to do for the rest of the day, so I could just easily charge my phone. We'll see if that works. So, when going into this film, the very beginning of this is to showcase all of the Iron Man suits exploding. Because of course we have Savin or Savin, who is going on with these helicopters and taking out Tony Stark's Malibu mansion. So we of course at the beginning of this we have Tony who's going on and mentioning that there was a guy who had said once that we create our own demons. And then Tony's like, I don't know who said it, but he said it, so like I and so we have Tony going on and eventually saying it's like, well, I guess we really just have to like start from the beginning and like showcase where this all like started. So we pop into 1999 and it's Switzerland, and we of course have the ball dropping fairly soon. And so we have Happy in this film, who has a very vastly different look than he does in any other film, with his very long hair and very hefty goatee, where the only time we end up eventually seeing him with a goatee is to, of course, be eventually in uh, Far From Home when he has a blip beard. So, so Happy is going on and telling Tony, it's like, hey, the ball is dropping in 30 minutes. And so we, of course, have Tony going on and meeting this botanist who's to be called Maya and Maya Hansen. And so we have Tony who also bumps into Jensen, the guy from the very first Iron Man movie. And we, of course, have Jensen who's trying to get Tony's attention. But then eventually, like, Tony is to mention that Jensen is to be a guy called Hope. And that, of course, Tony is too drunk right now to kind of deal with Jensen. And so Tony is to go and make his way to his quarters, to his room, telling that that Maya is gonna need a doctor after both him and her go with his little like goofy toy that he has here. So we have, of course, Tony wanting to go with Maya because Maya is to go on and want to show her kind of studies of extremis, and hoping that Tony is going to somehow be able to solve the problem that she's having, or be able to just get something out of this work here. So Tony all of a sudden goes on into this elevator and is to, of course, meet Aldrich Killian, who is to be working with Advanced Idea Mechanics, AIM. For a lot of people that probably don't know AIM all that often, a lot of times you would actually see AIM more often than not. You would see them in like certain like Avengers animated stuff. Like if you go into the kind of the animated series, like the kind of later ones, we eventually have AIM used fairly often. They look kind of like the yellow hazmat suit kind of guys, but we never really see AIM much in this movie besides what Aldrich Killian is to say who he is, and we don't get much else from that, which kind of really freaking sucks, because I'm like, dude, we could have had like MODOK in this movie. Like, we could have had like any number of things that actually tie into AIM, like Scientist Supreme and all these other characters that are connected to AIM, but we got none of that. And that's the one kind of hugely deflating thing, is there were so many things that honestly could have been tied to AIM be put in this film, and instead it was like, oh no, like we're just gonna have just Aldrich Killian saying that he's AIM here, and but the real villain is Extremis and the Mandarin, and why is AIM even in this film? Because eventually there is a tie into that. So we have Aldrich that seems to be this kind of character who had gone through a certain number of injuries. I guess that's the way. That's the reason why he is to kind of be the way he is. And so Aldrich is to, of course, go on and say that he is a fan of Tony's, and that he's going to go and give Maya these cards. And Tony's like, yeah, like, give her 2 cards, one to throw away and one to never call again. And so Maya's going on and taking these cards, and she's like, okay, I'll look into them. Like, hey, like, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt kind of thing. So we end up having Tony, who is to, of course, lie to Aldrich Killian and tell him that, hey, man, like, I am like thrilled with the idea of working with you, and so I want you to meet me up on the roof in 5 minutes. I'm just gonna go and get my beak wet, and then I'll meet you on the roof in 5 minutes. Where we actually do have Aldrich Killian deciding to follow Tony's words and go onto this rooftop, and Aldrich is to wait 20 minutes thinking that Tony is actually going to come, and realize how much really Tony is just not a reliable person. And then Aldrich goes on and takes the next hour after that, realizing that, like, hey, maybe he should take that plunge. Maybe he should go and just jump off this roof to eventually make his way to the lobby. Because really just Aldrich Killian is to just be this just kind of desperate guy who eventually consistently gets turned down by women to the point of like Pepper Potts is to mention that, oh yeah, like I used to work with Aldrich Killian a lot, and like he really tried to like date me and whatever, and I wasn't at all interested, and so like you kind of honestly feel like you feel really sorry for Killian in this movie. You feel sorry for Aldrich here, and to the point when we kind of see him like change his life around, yeah, maybe by evil means or villainous means, but like when really looking at this character, I can't help but also just like feel bad for him, and I'm kind of happy that he turned his life around, and he does kind of turn into that like because I've seen the Ryan Reynolds film Just Friends. I'll admit that it's kind of a guilty pleasure where we have kind of Ryan Reynolds in that early part of the film where he's kind of this overweight kid, but then all of a sudden people just make fun of him so horrifically. He's like, well, like, hey, I'm gonna turn my life around and I'm gonna be somebody, and then he ends up becoming this big lavish music producer guy, and he has like a 6-pack abs and all this and that, and so like he's in the best shape of his life. So yeah, that's kind of what I see Aldrich Killing like being the same kind of person here, where we're just like, oh, like he turned his life around. Good for him. So we end up having, of course, Tony going and talking with Maya Hansen. And so Hansen is going on and showing these studies, and we have Happy, who is kind of touching this plant. And so Hansen is going on and telling Happy, it's like, the plant doesn't like that. And Tony's like, yeah, don't touch the plant. And Happy's like, I'm going to touch this plant. And then all of a sudden the plant ends up exploding. And so Hansen is like, well, yeah, that was the problem I had. While Tony, all his concern is getting into the bedroom with this woman. And all of a sudden when that plant explodes, we have Happy running in, jumping on top of of Tony, but like, hey, I got you, I'm protecting you. And Tony's like, yeah, I'm protected. You did your job. Good. Good on you. You're gonna become forehead of security many years later, but oh well. So then we have Hansen going and telling Tony, it's like, well, yeah, that's a problem that she's having, and Tony is to seem to try to figure it out after he is on the back of his you know who I am like name card. He is to try to scribble some things to figure stuff out. So cue us having some time passing here to where it's present day and it's right after the Avengers film, and it's in Malibu, California. So we have Tony, who is going on and is to, of course, be listening to Jingle Bells, and it's kind of like it's a really good version of it, and he's dancing. He's like, yeah. It's kind of like this. It's a little bit of that Spider-Man 3, a little bit. The Tobey Maguire is like, like, get on up. We have characters weirdly dancing in films at some point or another. So we have Iron Man, who of course is to look at all of his other suits, and he's like, hey, like, now it's time to announce the bouncing baby boy Mark 42. It's kind of weird that this armor doesn't have a name, it just has a Mark 42, where we have other Iron Man suits who have names, and that's what always kind of bugged me, where I was like, how is it that certain Iron Man suits have names and then some of them don't? They just have marks. So, like, I guess he had to come up with names. I don't know. It's so weird in this film. Like, why aren't they just called Mark whatever? That's the thing that kind of bugs me when thinking about it. Why do they have like Igor, Heartbreaker, so on and so forth by the end of this battle. I guess for just Tony to have something to call out, and so that way people won't get confused by him just shelling out numbers like, oh, who's 40 what? Who what now? Like, I guess that makes sense. So, but we don't, like, I don't think we really barely see certain of the, like, I don't think we see Blue Steel all that often in that movie, and I don't think we see, like, Gemini all that often either. I think those are the only two that don't feel actually used. I think there's a striker one that gets a little bit of camera time, but like that seems to be very minimal. Anyways, pushing on. So we have Tony that's going on and putting certain kind of little beads into his body, and I'm like, wait a second. I'm like, what's gonna happen if Tony is, of course, gonna need an like MRI anytime in the near future? Like, how is he gonna be able to like get an MRI in any part of this body? And then also, what happens if he breaks his arm or something like that? How is he gonna be able to do these hand signals and whatever? What if somebody goes for the hand and chops his hand off and like, well, now he can't like now he can't signal his for his suit to come there. So like, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't quite exactly make sense here. But this Mark 42 suit wasn't all that great anyways. It was just something to just put into this film to, I think, justify certain merchandise choices. Where, like, if somebody was to just get, like, a certain hand of Iron Man, like, oh yeah, like, I can technically cosplay as Iron Man 3 Tony Stark, because I only have the helmet, or I only have this certain Iron Man piece, and so now I can justify wearing it, because, like, I'm Iron Man 3 Tony Stark. So, like, I guess that was, like, a merchandising ploy for some odd reason. So, we go on and we have, of course, the suit coming in hot, Mark 42, because it's like, it's basically like, what, like 20 feet away, really. But this suit just comes in like blazingly fast to where like Tony is having to like brace himself and repulse his way to just kind of balance himself with this suit. And then all of a sudden the faceplate is coming in, and so Tony's like, I'm not afraid of you, come on. And so Tony ends going and like flipping around and dropping with his superior landing, and he's like, yeah, I'm the best. Like, but then we turn around and we have Tony, who quickly loses every piece of this suit, and I'm like, oh my god, we're gonna have that kind of Iron Man thing go on here. And that ends up going throughout the whole film, where we have Iron Man consistently losing the pieces of his suit, or eventually we get that huge surprise thing where we're like, oh no, Iron Man's gonna get hit by a truck. But who cares? But who cares, sadly. So, we now, at this moment, are having also Tony, who hadn't slept for 72 hours, that he hasn't slept for multiple days. And really, that's the whole massive thing about this film, is that Tony, because of the Avengers and him having to face that alien threat, and he was just a man in a can, and like he just couldn't sleep through that whole event, or couldn't sleep after that event, because it's like things are really ramping up here. And so we of course have the Mandarin come in, and of course he is to give us his very first quote of this movie, where he goes on and he is to, of course, delivering us, some people call me a terrorist. I consider myself a teacher. You ready for another lesson? And then he goes on to talk about 1864 in Sand Creek, Colorado, where U.S. military went in to go and wipe out the Braves' families while they were away going and hunting. And so we have that said here, and then we have then the Mandarin going on and saying that 39 hours later, we have him going on and having him attack a certain thing in Kuwait, I think an airbase in Kuwait, and he's like, I did that. And so, and it was a quaint military church, and so, like, he's kind of comparing that to, of course, the Braves, and how these people are away, and so on and so forth. And so after that moment, after that speech, where, of course, the Mandarin is directing this whole speech to President Ellis, and we eventually get this to ramp up, and of course have just the Mandarin saying here, it's like, well, like, get ready for another lesson. So after this moment, after talking about this thing, then in response, the President Ellis is decided to go and change War Machine to then give him another slap coat of paint to eventually have him become Iron Patriot. And everybody's like, oh my god, yeah, Iron Patriot. Yeah, like, they just slapped a new paint job on him and he's something different now. He's someone different. And so everybody has their opinion. All these fashion people are having their opinion about Iron Patriot. And when looking at this, you can kind of tell, like, what kind of year, time, whatever this movie was. Because some of these people probably aren't even, like, actually employed or alive or whatever. But, like, when we're looking at it, yeah, like, you have people kind of giving their opinion about this. So we now go on and have both Tony and Rhodes, who are now at this place, this establishment called Neptune Net, which is an actual place. And so we go on and have Tony and Rhodes kind of debating about the whole Iron Patriot thing. And Iron Patriot, I guess, had gone on to get revamped by AIM instead of by Tony still. So I'm like, so every time we have either War Machine or we have Iron Patriot now, every single time this is either done by a different company that's not Tony. Why don't they just easily take that tech and use it in this film like they did in Iron Man 2? Technically with Vankov, like, why not just have just an AIM Iron Man suit? Because why not? Unless they were just to paint the suit. Is that all they did? So, like, why didn't we have, like, an extremis Iron Man person? Like, that would have made sense of, like, the Mandarin, if he didn't have these magically wielding powers, that maybe he just has an Iron Man suit, and, like, that would be good enough for this story. So, but again, Tony and Rhodes are going on and are making fun of the Iron Patriot, and Tony's like, Iron Patriot, it doesn't sound better. And so Rhodes goes on and says, like, well, hey, like, the Iron Patriots seem to work well in study groups, so we just decided to just go with that. That it seemed like War Machine was coming off too harsh, so, like, they had to go on and, like, go through and ask people, like, who gives a like, an Iron Man suit is an Iron Man suit. You don't have to rename stuff, and I don't know. It just seemed like they needed to come up with a reason for Iron Patriot to be put on here. But then they had to turn around and make fun of the Iron Patriot thing to just say, like, yeah, this thing isn't going to last. They're going to go right back to the War Machine thing, which they did for every single other film that Rhodes is to be in. And I was like, so what was the whole point of even doing an Iron Patriot thing? They could have handed the Iron Patriot suit off to possibly, like, a Spider-Man character, and that would have been cool. There would have been a Norman Osborn kind of equivalent person that gets the Iron Patriot suit, and, like, you could have some fun with that. You could have gone with that, like, when really finding out what is to be the fate of certain characters after, once we get to Far From Home, so to speak. So we go on and we have, like, Tony and Rhodes still talking about the Iron Patriot, and so Rhodes is like, well, hey, like, I don't want to be a dictator to, like, tell people, like, what I want and whatever. And so Rhodes is say, like, hey, I don't want to be a dick. And so all of a sudden these two kids come by and they're like, hey, like, can you autograph my little paper? And so all of a sudden Tony's like, sure, and I loved you in A Christmas Story. The one little kid is to look like the kid from A Christmas Story, and it's kind of hilarious that they say that, because of course the box of scraps guy that we end up seeing from Far From Home and in the very first Iron Man movie is actually the A Christmas Story guy, which you would have thought that would have been funny if they would have figured out a way to incorporate that guy in this story, but it's whatever, because it would have made a lot of sense to have that guy actually here, because he was actually in a Christmas film, but they couldn't have, I guess, figured that out. So, but I guess they just did it later down the road. So, and I don't even think that I even said anything about that when I went into Far From Home. Oh well, like, I said it now. So we go on and we have Tony, who is also wanting to ask Rhodes about the Mandarin. It's like, hey man, like, tell me about the Mandarin. Tell me how we can beat this guy. And so all of a sudden, we end up having Tony, who's trying to sign this paperwork from this kid in crayon, and he's, like, adjusting all the things that the kid was to draw, like an Iron Man in a parachute, and he's like, I don't know about that. Like, he's, like, correcting the kid's work, I guess. But then all of a sudden he, like, tries to sign the paperwork, and all of a sudden he breaks the crayon because the kid goes and tries to whisper, like, what about that wormhole? And all of a sudden Tony's to break the crayon, and he's like, I broke the crayon. And he needs to desperately run off because someone is to remind him about the Avengers movie, which made him a load of money, I'm assuming. Yes, probably. I'm being honest. Like, made him a lot of money. Like, it continues to do so with all the other Avengers films. So Tony goes running off to eventually have Jarvis go and make a analysis of what is going on with Tony, because I think that's actually a really brilliant thing that we have going on here, because in Iron Man 2 we had Tony, who is to have that whole blood toxicity thing, and, like, now I guess more than ever Tony is to probably be concerned after Iron Man 2 about his health. And so now he goes into the suit to get an analysis to, like, hey, was I poisoned? Was, like, what's going on with me? And then Jarvis is like, well, no, you just had an anxiety attack. And so we end up finding out that Tony now has anxiety, which I don't even know if they actually cured the anxiety in any of the other films. Why isn't Tony in any other film all of a sudden having these panic attacks? Was there some kind of cure that happened? Didn't seem like there was, because there was never a resolution from Iron Man 3 to any of the other Avengers films. Or did we just have Tony pick up like Zen yoga or something, and he just found the cure for his anxiety, or he took anxiety medications somewhere in some part of the movie somewhere, whatever. Maybe him fixing his ticker at the end of this film went on to eventually completely relieve his anxiety, or maybe just him being able to finally sleep really was to also resolve his anxiety. I don't know. Anybody have a clue? Was there any other Avengers movie that eventually talks about him having anxiety and him solving it? Did did both did both Tony and Bruce give like Tony breathing exercises or something like that from Incredible Hulk to eventually have Bruce deal with his anxiety through a breathing exercise or something? I don't know. But anyways, I'm taking too long for this. So we we of course then turn around and we have now we have Happy that's going on and is of course being forehead of security for Pepper Potts, and I feel like I'm there's a transition here that I'm missing somewhere. Uh, oh well, we'll figure it out. If I forgot anything, so we have Pepper Potts, who is going on and doing her CEO business, and it seems that she is to get an appointment from Aldrich Killian, and she is kind of regretting this whole thing because she at some point tried or was seemingly forced to almost date Aldrich at some point, and she's like, "Yeah, I never really liked this guy," and so we have, of course, Happy trying to eventually use the robots that Tony used to have in his house to go on and try to use them as maintenance drones for this building, so that way the human resources, the human part of it, could just be kind of dwindled down, so that way they can save money somehow. And Pot and Pepper's just like, you know what, Happy, I love what you're doing here, being the head of security and all that jazz, but really, there's been like complaints up to 300%, and like also like don't be such a stickler with all these badges, because he's like, hey, badges, like badges. So eventually Aldrich Killian is to go on and talk to Pepper about his big brain, as Happy is to say. And so immediately we have Happy, who's like, hey, do you have a badge? And he's like, yeah, I have one. With Aldrich, and then Happy's going and sitting and seeing Savin, who is to also like, hey man, where's your badge? And Savin's like, hey, right here, like, Merry Christmas. Anyway. So here's the weird thing. So we have Happy going on and talking to Tony, seemingly in a very wide open space here. Does anybody like? This is a wide open space where anybody could be hearing what Happy is saying right now, and Happy is going and talking about shifty characters and big brains and all this dialogue with Tony, and flip the screens and whatever, and he's in this wide open space. Why isn't Salvin just kind of hearing this whole bit of dialogue like, yeah, like maybe I should just go and just freaking Happy? Because why isn't he hearing this whole stretch of dialogue here? Was he just like putting his headphones on, listening to music somehow? Maybe that's it. So Sabin was. So we have Aldrich coming in, and of course he's showing, of course, Pepper at first the galaxy, and he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, that's the galaxy." Oh, like I just love watching the galaxy, and so then Aldrich is to show Pepper this big brain, and she's like, "Ooh, brain! Ooh, wow, what's this?" And so Aldrich is like, "Well, this is my brain. This is the live feed." And then they go and they get up on this table to have Aldrich pinch Pepper, and she's like, "Are you sure?" And he's like, "Yeah, pinch me. I can take it." So we have her pinch him to eventually see the nerves in the brain. So the real selling technique for Aldrich here is to say it's like, well, you know what? I was here once before, and like I had to work with Tony, and it feels like Tony couldn't have been bothered before, but it seems like we have a new CEO here, and it seems that uh, maybe this new CEO will want to take the risk where Tony couldn't have been bothered. And so Pepper is just like, yeah, no. Like, I don't want to go and I don't want to do this either. Even though Extremis does sound like a promising thing, like, Pepper still just doesn't want to take the risk, and Pepper is to just go on and have both Aldrich and Pepper go on and leave here, where Happy is to get, of course, Pepper's ride. And so Aldrich is to go on and say, it's like, well, my father's saying, and one of his many sayings is, uh, failure is the fog that is to eventually get us to triumph or something like that. He ends up saying some goofy, weird thing like that. And Pepper's like, I don't even know what it means. And so Aldrich is like, I don't know either. My dad was kind of a weird guy. Like, I don't know what it was, why Aldrich just had to have these weird, goofy sayings from his dad. Like, I guess that was the only thing to make him unique enough. But also, I don't remember that quote all that well. Um, but yeah. So, going on, we had Happy, who's going on and, like, telling Tony what's going on with the whole big brain thing, and that Savin is a shifty character. And then Happy's gonna go and get the plates of these people and figure out who they are, and Tony is saying like, well, hey, like, forehead is security, like, oh, this is great stuff, but somebody's probably stealing copier ink, so. And Tony, of course, is mentioning it's like, well, yeah, I miss you, Happy, and Happy's like, I miss you too, but the way things were, like, now you're going off with the Super Friends, and I don't know where you are anymore. And I'm like, the Super Friends are a DC thing, and it's kind of funny. We have Favreau kind of mentioning a DC reference in a Marvel thing. I guess is a little nod. But really looking at it, we have like Aquaman who references like Pinocchio, and at some points in time, we have a lot of DC stuff that references like Disney stuff, that is to eventually be in their films somewhere. So we now go on and we have Potts, who, of course, is to make her way to Tony's place. And she, of course, is to see this massive bunny that is like, Merry Christmas, Potts. So we go on and we have Pepper, who is to make it into the, like, Tony's place. to all of a sudden find the Iron Man suit who is keeping Pepper company for a while. And so Tony is going on and talking to Pepper, and eventually Pepper is to mention, it's like, like, am I going to be able to kiss you, Tony? And so we have Tony's like, beep boop boop, like, oh, I'm sorry, like, you can you just like kiss the face slit? No. So Pepper is to say that she's to go on and want to get a wrench to kind of, or a screwdriver to kind of pop that thing open. And Tony's make up a lie that that of course he is to have to quarantine that whole basement. If anything, she'll need a hazmat suit and whatever. For all of a sudden Pepper to realize that this Iron Man suit was not really Tony, and that Tony is actually working out. So Pepper's like, hey, like, so you now have this like thing kind of like trying to be you. And so Tony goes on, and Pepper is frustrated because Tony had ate dinner already, and Tony is just like, well, hey, like I thought you were gonna have drinks with Aldrich Killian. And she's like, oh, really? Like, come on, like, are you jealous? So Tony is saying, it's like, well, hey, like I want to protect you, because after that whole Avengers thing, and I was a man in a can, and like the only thing that has kept me from cracking up is having Pepper move in with him. And so Tony really wants to keep Pepper safe, and we have these suits that, of course, Pepper is to say, it's like, well, it's a God, what is she to say here? It's a distraction, or it's it's some kind of like it's some kind of something, and Tony used to say that it's a part of him. And because we have it where, God, what does Pepper say about it? Like, she ends up saying that it's I don't remember. I just don't. So Tony is to go on here and is to eventually have both so we transition here with these two characters, because Pepper is to mention to Tony, it's like, well, hey, I'm going to take a shower and you're going to join me. And he's like, okay, great. So now we go on to have, of course, Happy, who is to follow Savin. And so Savin, of course, is going on and meeting a military soldier who, of course, is to be called, as I'm biting for time here, really? A guy they don't even have on the IMDb. Oh my god. Let me pause here 1 second. Jack Taggart. Jack Taggart is to be a soldier that is to be getting a dose of Extremis, but it seems that Savin is to not really need Jack to get another dose of this, because obviously he is going to explode here. But I think Savin was just wanting to sell more of this drug, so that way, of course, he could go on and make some profit here, and then the Mandarin is to go on and just cover up this whole ordeal. So we have, of course, Happy going and following Savin to eventually see this drug trade going on, and so Happy, of course, is to bump into Jack and go and take one of the samples and start walking off, and then Savin is to conveniently bump into Happy and be like, "Hey, guy!" Like, "Hey!" And so we have it where Savin is asking Happy, it's like, "Well, hey, like, you here to see one of your chick films or your chick flick films?" And Happy's like, "Well, yeah, like, I'm here to go and see the party is over, and it has you and your little friend there involved." So, because Happy's to say that he, of course, is to have the little sample, and that they're, of course, they're gonna go to jail after this. So we, of course, now have Jack, who is getting an overdose on Extremis, and he is going to explode here. And this explosion is to eventually cause Happy to then go and point out this dog tag thing before he is to, of course, pass out here or go into a coma-like state. And so, but Savin is to get out of here alive to go on and do other things, as Happy was to go and punch him in the face, and the extremist took over and kind of healed his wounds, realizing that Happy's like, okay, like, so there was no point to punch this guy in the face because his wounds just heal so quickly. So Happy is now in the hospital, and Happy is to go on and tell this nurse that he is to love Downtown Abbey because he finds it eloquent, and for everybody to have these badges on, and so on and so forth. So Tony, of course, is to go on and see all this news coverage and like, well, hey, like, how do you feel about what's going on here? Is somebody going to finally take down this Mandarin character, and so on and so forth? I'm paraphrasing here. So Tony turns around and is like, well, yeah, like, you want me to say something about it? It's like, well, hey, like, the Mandarin, whoever you are, like I'm telling you now that you've just died, buddy. Like, and that if you want to be a real man about it, like, I'm going to give you my address. I'll leave the door open. So Tony then takes this one guy's recording device because he's annoyed with him anyways, chucks it, and he's like, "Bill me," and he walks off. So Tony goes off and is to go to his place, and so now we end up having it to where whenever Tony is to have somebody come to his home, he's wearing full-on Iron Man gear, and we're technically at Ding Dong right now, and Tony's like, seriously, we're on Ding Dong right now? I just threatened terrorists. And so we have Jarvis is like, well, there's only so much I can do when you give the whole world your home address. So Tony then goes on is to make it to the door to say, like, hey, are you the Mandarin? It's like, don't you realize that this guy is a dude? So Tony, of course, is to see Maya there, and because I guess he doesn't recognize her at first, but then Maya then explains, like, who she was, and we have Tony is like, please don't tell me there's a 12-year-old kid in your car, and he's like, and she's like, well, he's 13. And he's like, eee. So we have Tony who's telling Maya that, well, here's the thing, like, I have a girlfriend, I have someone with me, And all of a sudden, that one girl, of course, is to be chucking down her luggage because Tony and Pepper were, of course, laying in bed, and Tony is having a nightmare, and the Iron Man armor is to show up, and so Tony is to go on and knock the armor down, and Tony, of course, is saying it's like, well, hey, I must have called it in my sleep, and Tony's saying like, I'll adjust some settings and whatever, and Pepper is like, you know what, I'm leaving, tinker with that. So we now go on and we have Tony and Pepper arguing about the bunny and if she liked it or not, and so on and so forth. And so we have Maya, who is to realize there's a rocket making their way into this house, and if they should be worried about that because maybe Tony has some weird kind of defense thing going on here, possibly like an Iron Legion kind of thing going on for other films. So all of a sudden this rocket comes in, and so Tony is to do the hand gesture to put the Iron Man's armor onto Pepper to protect her. And so as these helicopters are to arrive to have Solomon, of course, on it, we now have, of course, Tony who's telling Pepper to go and protect Maya and stop stopping and get out of here, so Pepper can be protected. So Pepper and Maya make it out of the complex, and then Tony is to, of course, call back for the suit. And so we have Tony who is to, of course, have the issue of his suit not having the flight ability or not having much of anything, because this is a prototype that can't do frickin' anything. So we have Tony having to fight off these helicopters by weird conventional means, by having Tony using his repulsors to like toss out this elevator to hit this, or elevator, piano. What am I saying? Piano to hit this one helicopter. That's what I was. I got a mixture of piano and helicopter, and I got elevator for whatever reason. So that's one taken down. Tony is to go and rip out one of these rockets from on his arm and toss it out there and hit that with his repulsor to get another helicopter down. And so all of a sudden there, of course, is to be other rockets coming into this home to eventually go and have it all eventually just start to crumble down to where eventually Tony is forcibly underwater now and having the Iron Man suit having to save Tony from drowning, of course. And so the Iron Man arm goes and is to be off of Tony and telling him to take a deep breath and grab him and kind of get him out to safety. Everybody is assuming that Tony is dead right now because I guess they couldn't exactly find his body, so they naturally assume he's dead. So we now have, of course, weirdly, Tony had gone on before this whole him having to go to see Maya. Tony had tried to figure out about the whole Chinese theater thing and find out that it seems that there was a soldier connection, because Happy is to point out these dog tags. So now Tony is to go on and try to figure out other news stories where there is to be a similar kind of explosion pattern that is to, of course, deal with a soldier. And Tony, of course, is to find out there's something going on in Tennessee. So Tony is to tell Jarvis to create a plan for Tennessee because that's where they're going. So all of a sudden, we end up having the Iron Man armor deciding to go off and fly its way itself to Tennessee. And Tony is to wake up from all of his injuries, now flying to Tennessee with 5% power left. And Tony's like, oh my god, like, why am I flying to Tennessee? Like, why are you doing this? And so we end up having Jarvis, who is at this point having a hefty amount of malfunctions, and he doesn't even realize really what he's doing. So we now, of course, end up having now Tony, whoops, who is to be at the mercy of this Iron Man suit, and now he's stuck in Tennessee, where he's going on and having to drag this Iron Man suit and go on to have to go and steal a poncho from some wooden Indian. And so Tony is going on and making it to some phone booth where he's going and calling Pepper, leaving her some message where eventually Potts is going to be able to find the Iron Man helmet and see that there's a message inside of it, so she realizes that Tony is still alive. So when like all of this wreckage is of course being cleared out to eventually figure out where Tony is within this building somewhere or somewhere under the water. So Tony is to turn around and take this Iron Man suit and put it in some garage somewhere and start to try and just toss this body there and eventually hope that there's going to be someone here from this place where he can go and try to bargain with them to like give them some kind of salvation or some kind of something because he's Tony Stark. So we eventually have Tony who's trying to work on some things, and we all of a sudden have, of course, a kid named Harley who arrives with some potato gun and is, of course, going like, hey, who are you kind of thing. And so we end up having Tony not really saying the name of who he is and whatever, just saying like, oh, I'm just some mechanic. So, but eventually we have Harley who realizes that Tony is Iron Man. And he's like, oh, you're Iron Man. And he's like, yeah, sometimes. So Harley is to go and shoot his potato gun at Tony to kind of show that like this potato gun does work. And Tony's like, well, you've lost all your ammo. And so Tony is to kind of like make fun of Harley's kind of potato gun also, saying that the barrel is too long and so on and so forth. So Tony turns around and is to go and ask Harley. It's like, well, like, hey, who's all here? Like, I don't want to have to like be worried that I'm gonna like have to like take somebody down or something like that because I was unprepared for somebody to be here. So, and we have Harley who's asking Tony about his like his chess piece, and it's like, well, hey, it's just an electromagnet like stuff that you have here. So Tony is going on and hearing Harley's life story about how he has just his mother, because his father at one point had left at some point to go out for scratchers, and I guess that he had won a lot of money from those scratchers because he never came back home. And so Tony is like, well, dad's leave, you don't have to be a pussy about it. So we go on and we have Tony, who is now making demands to tell this kid that he'll eventually seek salvation if he is to go and get him a spring and a certain number of things and a tuna sandwich and so on and so forth. So we have, of course, Harley going on and like asking Tony questions and so on and so forth. And Tony's like, you know what I'm thinking? Where's my sandwich? Where's my sandwich? So now we transition and have Harley going and getting Tony this sandwich and all the stuff that he requested. And so now we have Harley who's going and taking Tony to the site of which that this one kid named Chad Davis was to, of course, be killed at. And so we have Harley that is desperately asking Tony about the Avengers or like about the aliens, and Tony's like, don't ask me about that. Like, I'll, like, do you want to start me? Like, I'll have a panic attack right here, right now. I don't want to hear about anything. And so the kid is to consistently try to give Tony a panic attack, and like the kid is like, well, do you want me to stop? Like, I think I'll stop. And like, Tony's like, shut up. So Tony goes on to this place, and so we have the kid saying that the shadows, I guess, are to all represent of this blast. The shadows are to represent all the people who, of course, were to go to heaven after this whole accidental death. But then that the guy, Chad Davis, was to, of course, die here and go to hell, and that's why he didn't get a shadow in this blast. So we now, of course, have Tony who's kind of asking, it's like, well, do you think there is anybody really left alive here that I can go and talk to that's to be involved with this guy? So eventually Tony is to be able to get in contact with Mrs. Davis to eventually get a file from her. And so while, of course, Tony is to go on to this local bar to meet with Miss Davis, Tony is going on and having Harley stay by the Iron Man suit to have it be charging. And so at one point, Harley is being called by Tony, and Harley's eating candy, and Jarvis is now like online, but he ends up saying the wrong cranberry at some point, and so like his speech needs to get reset. So, and then eventually he is to be told that he is to, of course, go to Miami to eventually take down the Mandarin at some point. So let me pause here for 1 second. Right. We are going to be doing this through old-fashioned memory. Old-fashioned memory of every single name. So we go on, and like, luckily, I think I know for the most part what I'm talking about here. Luckily, so because I think I've seen this movie enough to know what I'm talking about. for hopefully most of this. So we also had the one moment in this story where Tony was to also, or that happens after. Okay, so I was just kind of reconfirming when moments were happening. So yeah, let's go to the bar scene. So Tony goes to this local bar to eventually go and talk to Mrs. Davis, and so Tony was to tell Miss Davis the truth that her son was to get used uh, by somebody, and that it wasn't his fault. And so Mrs. Davis is like, "Well, you're not the person that called me on that phone once before, because it seems that someone else was also after this file that Tony had." And all of a sudden we end up seeing Brandt, who is to be an extremist agent from Homeland Security, supposedly. And she is to try to arrest Tony, and all of a sudden we have the sheriff who's coming in. It's like, well, hey, like, I need a little bit more information than what's kind of going on here. I don't trust that this is some Homeland Security officer and whatever just arresting Tony Stark. I need a little bit more update than that. And Brandt is saying, it's like, well, sheriff, it's beyond your pay grade. And so the sheriff is like, well, hey, like, you're going to have to go and call whoever you need to call to give me that upgrade, because, like, I want to know what's really going on here. So Brandt is go on and take her badge, and of course is to melt it into this guy's face, and then tear through his chest with her arm, and then go off and start killing people. And so Tony, of course, is to run like a madman after getting this file, to then be tied up, but he is to go on and break his way through this one window, as he's to tell somebody, like, hey, do you think that's crazy? Like, go ahead and see this. So Tony crashes through some glass window to be at some restaurant, where eventually we play around with the fact that this extremist girl is going and playing with Tony to eventually burn burn certain things. And we have Tony trying to fight with Brandt, and he's like, I've fought hotter girls than you. And we have Brandt who's like, well, hey, like, you just have you have a cheap trick and a one-liner. And Tony's like, well, hey, lady, that could be my autobiography. So, like, I feel like there's also another thing going on with it, like, besides this moment that I had completely forgotten about. But we'll finish this up. So Tony is to go on and figure out a way to eventually use the cuffs that are burnt and gasoline and all kinds of things to eventually cause this explosion, for eventually Brandt to eventually explode here and be killed off. And so we go on, and now we have still Savin to deal with. And at one point we have Harley, who is to make his way here because they're connected. And Harley at one point is to chuck a snowball at Savin and to kind of save Tony at some point. But eventually we have it where Tony is to try to scramble to this water, or near this water tower. And so Savin is to use this water tower to go and try to have this fall onto Tony, with, again, him not really having his suit handy here. but it seems like he is to have an alternative thing here where he is to concoct some kind of repulsor like beam here. So we have Savin, who is to grab Harley and is to, of course, kind of pelt out to Tony, help me, help me. Like, what do you want for Christmas this year, kid? And so we have Tony, who's mentioning of course, Harley, it's like, hey, you know what we do with bullies? Because, of course, Tony was to go and give Harley a bully hindrance thing, this little flash thing that, of course, was to blind his would-be attacker, because Tony's to realize this kid is to get bullied, and that possibly this little device here could save him from numerous times of him getting picked on. So Harley then uses this device to eventually get away from Savin, to have then Tony have this one-off repulsor that is to go and shoot onto Savin. Not exactly kill him, because the killing moment becomes or goes later on. And so Tony is to scramble away from here, and so we end up having now Harley and Tony, where they're going back and forth about Harley going like, hey, I saved you, and Tony's like, well, hey, I saved you first, and don't be all grandiose. And so the kid, or Tony, goes into his car, going off and wanting to leave the town, and we have, of course, Harley, who's saying, it's like, well, hey, like, you gonna leave me like my dad? And Tony's like, wait a minute, you seriously trying to guilt trip me here? like, come on, kid. So we have, like, still Harley, who's like, well, hey, like, we're connected, and and like, I thought we had something here. And so Harley's like, I'm cold, and Tony's like, yeah, like, I know you're cold. You know how I know you're cold? Because we're connected. And he drives off, and he's like, oh, it's worth a shot. So Harley, or Tony, is to realize that there was some paperwork on Chad's file that was to at first say MIA, but then Tony realizes that it actually said AIM, and he's like, oh, so like this whole thing has to be a AIM project. And so now we, of course, have Tony, who's calling Rhodes, because Rhodes is to now be on a mission to try and find the Mandarin, because we end up having the Mandarin, who is to be holding hostage some Orca guy, who is to, of course, be somebody that is to, of course, be attached of course, President Ellis, to where he is to, of course, want to save this man that is on this TV. And we have the Mandarin, who's going on, and oh, I forgot about the whole, like, the Chinese theater Mandarin speech. I'll get to that in a second. So the Mandarin is to have his phone number connected into the president's phone. It's like, yeah, it's funny how we can do that, right? So the president is wanting to go and answer this call because he's like, it's the right thing to do. So we end up having the Mandarin going and shooting this man because, of course, he would. Because we have this guy who is to just teach the president another lesson that you're not going to save this man. So we have, of course, the Mandarin saying it's like there's nothing that can save you, not your red, white, and blue attack dog. Like nothing is going to save you. So right after the Chinese theater was to, of course, detonate the way it did, we had the Mandarin come on with this speech mentioning about fortune cookies and how fortune cookies aren't even Chinese, they're actually American. And that that these fortune cookies are just like uh, America. It's like false. It's like filled with lies and all this kind of so on and so forth. And so we have the Mandarin who's telling the president that it's like things are coming to a close and so on and so forth and like ready for another lesson and all these kinds of things. So we go on and we have President Ellis who's telling get Rhodes to figure out where this man is to solve this problem. So Rhodes is to supposedly track down where this transition is coming from, for all of a sudden Rhodes to eventually go on to find some sweatshop that doesn't have the Mandarin in it. And so Rhodes, of course, is telling his people that are feeding him this information that they had messed up again. And so he is going on to like have uh, the shaking of these women's hands and oh hey thank you hey yeah like it's my service, yeah, I can go and help you out, yeah, all right. So all of a sudden we have this one extremist girl who's to go on and take Tony take Rhodes down here, and we have the girl who's saying like yeah like he's down now, we can go and we can extract him later. And Rhodes is like, you can extract me out of this after out of after like after I'm cold and dead and whatever. And they're like, well, yeah, that's basically the plan. So they're now going on to take Rhodes here in the Iron Patriot and going to eventually try and burn Rhodes out of the suit. And eventually that will come eventually right around the time when Tony ends up getting held hostage by AIM to eventually force him to take on the mantle of working with AIM now. But we'll get there. So Tony, while Rhodes is going on and trying to find where the Mandarin is, just to realize this was whole a mistake, Tony was going on and talking to Rhodes and asking him, it's like, well, hey, like, your whole remodel was done by AIM, correct? And Rhodes is like, well, yeah. And so he's like, well, okay, then give me your passcodes and your username and whatever so that way I can get into AIM and like find out what they're doing and I can hack into them. And so Rhodes is like, well, you know, every time that I have to put all that stuff in, you know, I have to change it, right? And Tony's like, you just give me the codes, just give me the stuff. So Rhodes is to say, it's like, well, War Machine rocks with two X's, and he ends up telling him the username and the password and whatever. And Tony's like, well, that's way better than Iron Patriot. So Tony is to go off to this one news van that is having this coverage. And so Tony's going through and uh, and hacking into, of course, this aim to get this video footage about this whole extremist project. All of a sudden, have Gary, the cameraman, coming into the van, just going like, "Excuse me, guy, I don't know who you are." And all of a sudden, Tony just turns around. And he's like, "Oh, like Mom, I have to hang up the phone. Something magical is happening." And so Gary used to go on and tell Tony, it's like, well, yeah, like I kind of patterned my whole look over after you, and I also have my boom tattoo that is to be off of some like action figure that he customly made of Tony. And so Tony is like, a fat Scott Baio or something like that. So we have, of course, Tony who's telling, it's like, well, hey, like Tony needs Gary and Gary needs Tony. And so Tony used to say, it's like, well, hey, like help me out here, figure out how to adjust the satellite on here so I can get some kind of feed going on here. And so Gary ends up adjusting this satellite or whatever. So Tony then gets the videotapes of course, them doing these extremist projects, and not every single project, of course, is to work. And so some of these extremist characters are to run too hot and they explode, but that, of course, is the risk that you take for going and doing this extremist project. Is not everything is going to work out hunky-dory for every single person. And so Aldrich Killian is going on and taking these soldiers and experimenting on them, and that leads to eventually one of them going off, and he's like, okay, we got to evacuate, we got to get everybody out of here. So now Tony is to realize what exactly is going on, and so now that's when Tony, of course, is to go on and call Harley, and of course ask him, it's like, hey, where's the progress of the suit at? And so Harley used to say, it's like, well, the suit isn't charged yet. And Jarvis is like, well, the suit is charging, it's just like it's going to take a little bit longer than expected. And so it seems that Jarvis is to figure out that eventually the transmission of these Mandarin things are coming from a place in Miami. And Tony's like, okay, there's probably something wrong with Jarvis's speech, so maybe it's not really Miami. And Harley's like, no, it's really Miami. Like, I can see it right here. So Tony is to go like, all right, like this is interesting. So I'm trying to think here. So I was thinking about the Iron Patriot, like what happens with that whole like suit, because there's a lot of stuff that ends up happening with the Iron Patriot suit. So Tony, of course, is to now have to not be able to have the Iron Man suit with him right now. And so Tony is again having a panic attack because he's realizing that he can't use his suit to fight off these people. And so Harley's like, are you seriously having a panic attack again? Like, I didn't even mention New York. And Tony's like, you said it without saying that you said it. So, and so then Harley used to go on and have it be that Tony is having another panic attack here. So we have it where, of course, Harley makes the thought process of like, well, hey, if you don't have your suit on you, then if you're a mechanic, can't you just invent something? Can't you just invent a way for you to go and take down these guys without having your suit with you? And Tony's like, yeah, I can do something like that. So all of a sudden, Tony has to go off and buy all of this hardware for him to makeshift all of these weapons. And so I guess no one's the wiser when Tony Stark goes into a hardware store and starts buying up a bunch of things. So we go on, and we of course have Tony like making up like these weird glove things and like these Christmas ball things that come off as explosives and like all kinds of weird goofy stuff that we have here. So Tony goes off to Trevor's home to go through all of these guards to make his way to Trevor. And so we of course have Tony, who is to kind of hide behind certain beds and whatever to just realize that all these people are either drunk or like have partied too hard. So like we have the one girl who's like, yeah, like, and Tony's like, yeah, whatever. Like, so Tony goes on and is to find not the Mandarin, but Trevor Slattery. And so we now have, of course, Iron Man, who is dealing with Trevor, who is to now not be the ready for another lesson, the agronomic, the the anomaly of the serial killer and and all of this nonsense. And so Trevor is to go on and tell Tony the truth, that he is just an actor and that all of this is just movie magic and green screen and all of this nonsense. And because Trevor is and Tony is like, where is it? Like, where is the Mandarin? Like is it inside you? Is it some like is it some persona? What is it? And so Trevor is to admit that no, it's just some act. It's just some role that they wanted him, that the AIM wanted him to play, because he is some custom made terror threat. And that Trevor is to just be this guy who is to do all this because AIM had found out that Trevor was into drugs. And Tony is saying, like, well, were they going to try to get you off of it? And Trevor's like, no, they were going to give me more, and they were going to give me some sailboat, or they were going to give me some speedboat. And so, and they were going to give him like so much money and all the stuff that he could have ever wished for, and so on and so forth. So Tony is to go on and stop Trevor from trying to run away from him, of course. And Trevor is trying to offer up one of the birds, which is basically one of the girls, if like Tony will let Trevor go here, because Trevor, who is to of course eventually get arrested, eventually Trevor is like, well, hey, I want to roll on people right now. Like anybody I'm going to roll on, so that way I can get my my sentence just kind of dwindled down to possibly nothing, or time served, or whatever. Like, I'll do that. So we end up having Savin, who appears here, and he knocks, of course, Tony out. And so Savin is asking Trevor, it's like, well, hey, like, why didn't you hit the panic button? And Trevor is like, well, At first I panicked, but then I handled it. As he's popping this beer here. So we have Savin who goes and is to tie Tony to some bed frame and zip tie him. And so now Tony is eventually wake up to eventually re-meet up with Maya, who Tony is to tell Maya, it's like, well, hey, like, you're a prisoner like I am. And Maya's like, no, I can leave here whenever I want. Like, you're a prisoner. So, because what happened with Maya and Pepper were to go off to some hotel room to think that they were to be whisked away, to be hidden away. And so when Pepper and Maya were talking and Maya was realizing all the mistakes that she's made and so on and so forth, all of a sudden we have Aldrich, who appears where both Maya and Pepper are at, so that way Aldrich can go and knock out Pepper and keep her as some trophy to hold against Tony, forcing him to then want to work with AIM. And so Aldrich is breaking down to Tony his his perk package for working with AIM. So we end up having where Aldrich ends up shooting Maya to make sure that Tony is to want to work with him, because there's now nobody else that is to be the leading expert on Extremis besides Tony, because Maya is now dead. So we go on here and we have, of course, Aldrich's transition to dealing with the Iron Patriot armor and trying to get Rhodes out of it. And so Aldrich goes and tries to burn up the stomach of this suit. And so this suit is desperately wanting to eject Rhodes. And so Rhodes is like, don't eject, don't eject. Okay, I guess we're doing this. So Rhodes ejects out of the suit immediately to plant this Superman punch, which was so sweet. And so Rhodes goes and chucks this Superman punch for eventually Rhodes to try to fight off these Extremis. All of a sudden, Aldrich is to of course, breathe fire out of his mouth. And Rhodes is like, oh my god, you breathe fire? And so Aldrich is like, yeah. So Rhodes, of course, is to be taken out here. And so we had Savin, who is going on and telling Aldrich that if he's to burn up the suit, he's to ruin the suit. And Savin's like, well, you guys can fix that, right? He's like, well, yeah. So now Savin is going on and taking the suit and flying off to the president's plane so that way he can go and retrieve the president. And oh, Roxxon Oil. That must have been where the other guy was from. The guy that ended up getting shot by the Mandarin. I think that had something to do with Roxxon. And if I'm wrong, I can probably look it up eventually towards the end of this review and come back with a rebuttal and be like, oh yeah, it was so-and-so this guy. Because I don't remember, that role was so small. Does it really matter? I don't think it really does. And they do actually say the guy's name in the movie. So, but anyways, so we of course now have Tony, was to realize that his little weird Hello Kitty watch is going off. And so now Tony's to realize, oh, okay, well, my armor is coming in soon. Sweet. And so we end up having, of course, Tony, who's asking, uh, Ponytail Express, supposedly is his name on IMDb. How long does it take for something to travel from Tennessee to Miami? And the guy is like 800 and something odd miles. He's like, I'm good at that. I'm good with numbers like that. And so Tony's like, well, okay. So Tony ends up consistently going on and doing some countdown of when his armor is going to arrive. And he's like, 4, 3, 2, 1. He's like, it's gonna happen. Like I'm gonna give you guys the opportunity right now to put your guns down and run out of here, run off, because like it's coming, it's coming. 4, 3, 4, and they're like, stop it, like shut up, like it's look, whatever you're saying is not going to happen. So all of a sudden we end up having one of Tony's uh, Iron Man gauntlets that end up appearing, and so then Tony is to go and blast through some of these guys and take them out. He's like, I told you. So all of a sudden Tony's leg is to appear, and so now Tony's like, well, where's the rest of it? Where Harley is to go on and realize that the shed that he of course has uh, the the pieces, the armor, is to trying to get out of this one door, of course. So Harley goes and figures out a way to have these doors open for all this armor to make their way to Tony. So now Tony is going on and using a combination of his ability to technically fly here to then go on to use a combination of a gun and his Iron Man armor to go ahead and take down a lot of these, I guess we would say AIM guys, I guess. These AIM goons here, these AIM henchmen. So eventually Tony is to realize that the rest of the suit is to come here. And so now it seems that this suit is to have the ability to fly and any number of other things, because Tony is going to have to use this suit to eventually go on and fight against the, of course, President's plane, Battle of a Thing, and so on and so forth. So Tony then retrieves Rhodes, and so now we end up having them, of course, going and torturing Trevor to get information about what these guys are planning next. And so we end up, of course, having Trevor, as per usual, telling them everything and telling them where, of course, Aldrich's headquarters is. And so the only way, I guess, to get there is to, of course, use Trevor's speedboat, because Trevor's like, or Tony is saying to Trevor, it's like, well, hey, like you mentioned something about a speedboat, and Trevor's like, oh my god, like, are you gonna take everything from me, as well as arrest me? So, like, we also had that one moment while Trevor was originally talking to Tony, how he like fell asleep, and Tony had to just go and smack him to wake him up. Like, you seriously just nodded off there? So we have, of course, Tony, who is to go on and realize that the Iron Patriot armor is going off to uh, retrieve the president. And so now Iron Man is to have to go and fly off uh, to intercept this Iron Man armor. So the Iron Patriot is on this plane, and so we have certain guys who are wanting to, of course, take a picture with Iron Patriot, and he ends up just going off and kind of beating these guys up and welding them inside this one room. And so we end up having the Iron Patriot who goes on and takes President Ellis. And so when Iron Man is to arrive, he ends up having to just fight Savin in this parachute getup. So we have Tony trying to fight off Savin here. And so what ends up happening is that Tony ends up going and blasting like Savin's chest to where he no longer has like a heart, and so Tony's like, "Hey, like, revive from that," as Savin is to now die here. So, because Savin is to go on and tell Tony, it's like, "Well, hey, like, you have some people to catch," so Tony is to go off and try to retrieve every person who had flew out of this plane. And so now he's grabbing onto one person. And so Tony is asking Jarvis how many possible people can he eventually take. And so Jarvis is saying, it's like, well, you can probably only take 4 right now, and there's 13. So Tony is to now have everybody latch on to everybody, and that he says that he's going to electrocute their hands so that way they won't open up their hands back up. So Tony is saying that they're going to go and play Barrel of Monkeys here and try to have everybody grab onto these people so Tony can eventually figure out how to safely drop them into this water so that way they can kind of land in this water safely. So eventually all these people do get all connected together. They all fall into the water in a nice, neat little choreographed plan, which looks really cool. But anyways, so now the suit, of course, is to go on to see what mission is to go on next, to all of a sudden get hit by some truck somewhere, to have us find out that Tony was not actually in that armor and that he was still on that speedboat. And so we, of course, now have Rhodes who's talking to Tony. He's like, wait a minute, like, so now we're going to have to go off and face Aldrich. And how are we going to do that without any suits whatsoever now? Because the President Ellis is to have the Iron Patriot armor on him. And we have Tony without his Mark 42, so we, of course, end up having Tony calling out to Jarvis to have the house party initiative, to where at Tony's home, that I guess is to be kind of now kind of in construction, where they're kind of like pulling some stuff away. All of a sudden there's to be this big seal that is to be opened, that all of a sudden is to have a number of Iron Man suits all flying out of it, to eventually showcase this is going to be a big, massive ending towards the end of this film. So, man, we are so close to this, like, 2-hour mark. It's ridiculous. So there is so much going on in this movie. Good God. So I thought we could get like an hour and a half at least, but we're going into 2 hours. We're going into overtime. So We also consistently have Rhodes trying to call the vice president to desperately ask him to go and try and either kind of be protected, which the vice president is like, dude, I am well protected because nobody's going to come after me, because the Vice President Rodriguez is to align himself with Killian, and so he's not going to be any kind of worry about him getting kidnapped here. But we like consistently have Rhodes going on and talking to the vice president, and Rhodes is telling, of course, the vice president to like help with the whole thing going on uh, with the president getting taken, and the vice president is saying like, well, hey, yeah, like we can go and scramble some jets, which he doesn't do because like he's to, of course, again, be an ultra to his side, so he's calling for nothing and just letting the president get taken. So because Aldrich is telling the president, says, well, hey, like, I'm going to have a new leader. I'm going to have this vice president that is to welcome what I'm trying to do here. So, so, so we go on and we have, of course, the president who is to arrive with this Iron Man armor. And so we have also Aldrich, who is seeing Pepper, who is to be kind of locked into this one machine where she is to, of course, be Aldrich's trophy and is going to soon be put extremis inside of her. So Aldrich is going on and basically telling the president some kind of story that they're concocting here about Roxxon oil and like how the president is going to die. So that way there can be this kind of nifty backstory that the Mandarin is to tell here. So we have everything kind of set up here, and so both Tony and Rhodes are going to make it to this hideout, this place. And so we now, of course, have both Rhodes and Tony, who just have these handguns, going up against these extremist guys. And so Rhodes is desperately thinking, like, man, I would just love for a suit of armor right now. So we, of course, have Tony trying to shoot out certain things to, like, barely hit glass or anything like that. And so we have Rhodes, who immediately ends up hitting this one light, just kind of showing that he's a better shot than Tony is. It's like, dude, like, Tony, if he is to shoot anything, it's to be, like, target corrected and all kinds of stuff. So Tony is to eventually go on and showcase to Rhodes. It's like, well, hey, like, you wanted armor? Like, we're going to eventually have it here. So all of a sudden, the House Party initiative is to arrive. All of a sudden, all of the Iron Man suits are to arrive, and so it's like, okay, like let's bring them to church. So we end up having, of course, Heartbreaker, and we have of course Bones getting showcased here. We have Silver Sentry getting showcased here. I think Red Snapper ends up getting his helmet ripped off. And so we have one point where I think Tony is calling out for, I think, maybe one of the other Iron Men to help out Red Snapper because he's kind of getting overwhelmed by certain extremists, and yeah, his head just ends up getting ripped off. So I think it was Heartbreaker ends up having to help out Red Snapper. So we go on and we eventually have Tony, who is to go on into, I think, the Heartbreaker suit. Or no, wait, he, I think, ends up going into the Silver Century suit. And Rhodes is like, well, hey, where's mine? And he starts, like, putting his hands out. And Tony's like, yeah, they only fit for me. And so you have to go and find your own, like, your own armor. So Rhodes then has to go and find out where the president is being hung at. And so Rhodes is going on and having to fight these extremist characters uh, on this container. And so Rhodes is to go and shoot one of these like container strings to have all of a sudden these extremist guys go and fall off. And so now Rhodes is to eventually go and latch on to the president. And Rhodes is to go on and use the repulsor to uh, take down the one roped up thing of the president to then have them swing and have the president holding on to Rhodes. And eventually now Rhodes can cut the other rope to get the president down. And so Rhodes is like, President, you look really good, but I'm going to need that armor. So Rhodes goes on and, of course, is to get his armor back. And so then Rhodes is to get the president out there by basically having the president hold on to him. And the president and Rhodes end up going like so quickly, the president ends up like yelling in terror about having to fly out. So now we go on and we have Tony, who is consistently going from suit to suit to suit. So we have Tony, who's in the Silver Century suit, and he, of course, is to make his way to eventually find Pepper, who is, of course, now under this building that had collapsed upon her. And so now Tony is to try to figure out if he can lift this up to try and free Pepper, but it only makes it worse. So Tony's now grabbing for Pepper, and all of a sudden Aldrich is to appear and chuck Tony away. And Aldrich is telling Pepper, it's like, is this guy bothering you? Like, Aldrich has some pretty sweet lines in this ending thing here. And so really Aldrich is to really say here that he is really the Mandarin here, not Trevor, that was all just an illusion, that was all just a facade, that was all just a thing to just pin everything all on this Mandarin and have Aldrich not being blamed for any of this, because like put a face on this guy, like put kind of like a Bin Laden or a Gaddafi or some kind of face on this character instead of Killian. Like it looks much better. So we go on and we of course have Aldrich, who is to kind of rip out Tony's power thing, and so now Tony is just kind of like laying with his armor, just kind of like forcing him down here. And so now Aldrich is kind of on top of Tony, and he's starting to use his extremis power to burn parts of Aldrich's or Tony's suit. So Aldrich is like, hey, you feeling a little stuck? You feeling a little turtle, a little stuck in your shell? So Tony is now to just kind of watch as he is to possibly die here. And so Aldrich is saying, it's like, well, hey, like, you should probably close your eyes. You don't want to see this. Like, you should close your eyes. No. So all of a sudden, Tony is to use this one little knife thing to slice off Aldrich's hand here. And so all of a sudden, that one hand that is to melt down is to all of a sudden be the perfect thing for Potts to be able to get out of the problem or conundrum or whatever that she's in, to then escape from where she's at. So all of a sudden now we transition to oh god we have Tony consistently needing to go and transition from Iron Man suit to Iron Man suit, trying to like fight out any number of things, making his way back to Aldrich, and needing to fight Killian off. So we consistently, desperately have Tony trying to get into certain suits, and when there's problems with that this kind of environment that they're in is all of a sudden kind of rocking back and forth, we have Tony who ends up calling for Igor to kind of steady this this place that they're on. And so we have Tony that is to continue to go from certain suits to suits to suits, and eventually making his way to one of the Iron Man suits called Shotgun, where eventually when one of the extremists are to fight Tony, I don't know if it's Aldrich or not, but this Shotgun suit ends up getting its like leg chopped off and its like arm chopped off, to the point of when I think Aldrich is to chop or try to chop this suit in half, Tony ejects out of it to avoid getting killed here, but he still has all of his limbs and whatever, because we just continue to have Tony who just kind of ejects from certain parts of his suit so that way he avoids getting any kind of loss, a limb, and whatever here. So Tony just continues on to just keep going on from certain kind of Iron Man suits until eventually Mark 42 is to enter the fray here. And because when Tony is to keep going on into all of these suits like Heartbreakers and so on and so forth, every single one of these things are to eventually go on and just get killed. We also had at one point where one of the Iron Man suits were to grab Rhodes to transition him to where, of course, he could go and get to the president. And that's the one thing that I forgot about, where Tony is to tell Rhodes, is like, hey, I got you. And he all of a sudden has like one of the Iron Man suits coming in and grabbing onto Rhodes and saying like, okay, I got you, Rhodes. So we then go on and we have the one moment where, of course, Tony is to desperately continue to try to get into all these suits, to have a suit so he can fight these guys off. And there's the one spot where he's to try and jump into one of these suits, and all of a sudden the suit ends up getting taken out. And so now Tony's just like, oh crap. So that just transitions Tony to then eventually finding Pepper kind of hanging on by a thread. And so Tony is to say that he will catch Pepper, but eventually she seemingly is to fall to her death. And he's like, oh, like, because he says like, "Promise me, I'll catch you," and so, or I promise you I'll catch you, and that's what I meant. I was like, I promise, that made no sense. So we have, of course, Pepper falling to her death, and Aldrich seeing this whole thing happen, and he's like, I would have caught her. And so Tony's like, I want to just kill you right now. So we have Tony, who's to go on and run to go up against Aldrich, to just slide from underneath him, and Aldrich is to kind of like jump over him. And so that's, of course, when Tony is to get into this suit and is to try and, of course, fight off Aldrich for all what good it really does. And so then Tony is to scramble to keep trying to get into other suits, but then eventually what ends up happening is that Tony is to re-meet up with Aldrich and is to have Mark 42 incoming. And so Tony's like, oh, the prodigal son returns. Like, I have the perfect suit now. So all of a sudden, Mark 42 is to come in, and all the pieces are to all fall away. And Tony's like, oh, whatever. And so we, of course, end up having Aldrich, who I think is to have, like, I think at some point there was to be another, like, one of his father's, like, many sayings somewhere in here. But so Aldrich is to go on and, like, explain also that whole, like, rooftop thing where Aldrich was to get from Tony one thing, and that was desperation. And I know this is kind of coming back to like a earlier part of this movie, and so now we have Aldrich, who is to like say, it's like, well, now like Tony is have to go into now having to fight from desperation. So Tony then goes and takes Mark 42 and is to go and put it on to, of course, Aldrich. And Tony is to tell Jarvis to self-detonate the Mark 42 suit. So we're assuming again that Aldrich is to die here. And so Tony is to make his way down to eventually finding out that Pepper is actually still alive. And so now all of a sudden one of the Iron Man suits is coming in trying to take down Pepper here. And so we, of course, end up having Aldrich come back in because Tony is to see that this Iron Man helmet is to be missing a head inside of it that is to be Aldrich's. So Aldrich ends up coming to Tony and saying, I am the Mandarin. And so all of a sudden we end up having Pepper, who is to be being attacked by this Iron Man suit. And so Pepper's to look at Tony, and Tony's like, what, are you mad at me? And so all of a sudden Pepper is to go on and rip through with her hand this Iron Man suit to smash it down on the ground, to rip the hand out of this thing to eventually use this repulsor to then take one of these like little rockets and kick the rocket to eventually repulse and just take out Aldrich here. And we now have Pepper, who ends up killing the villain at the end of this story, because it makes a lot of sense. Like, she was being tortured by him, and like technically she was an extremist, so it makes a lot of sense for her to be the hero of this story technically. And of course, like, it seems like they end up having her do a lot of things here. Like, they end up having her technically in the Iron Man suit and a just number of other things here. So we have Tony that's making the joke about Pepper being a hot mess, and so Tony is to want to hug Pepper, and she's like, "Well, like, don't touch me. I might like put you on fire." And he's like, "No, no, no, no. Like, you know what? I think that I cured this once before. I think I can do this again because I was drunk when like I figured out some kind of cure for this. So I think we can figure something out." Like, wouldn't it have been cool if we were to have seen Pepper Potts in some other movie where she still had extremis? And wouldn't that have been a cool, interesting thing to do here? But, like, they just didn't go in that direction. To eventually have some, like, after thing, but, like, no, they just tied only the Iron Man 3 stuff to Iron Man 3, and they just kind of bottled it into that thing. So, we now, of course, after this whole fight has technically been won here, we now have Tony, who is to tell Jarvis about the Clean Slate Initiative and to go on and take whatever Iron Man suit is left and just explode all of them to create this firework like effect. And so Tony is to, of course, now tell Pepper, it's like, well, hey, like, do you like the show? And she's like, yeah, it's beautiful. So now we have it where like everybody's won, and so like, how the heck is Tony even going to get out of here? How the heck is he even going to make it home now that he has no suit? So now we have the aftermath of this whole movie where Tony is to go on and live up to what he said to Harley, that he's going to go and give him his salvation. And so when Harley is to make it home one day, we had Tony who is to go on and uh, eventually give Harley all these gadgets and all the potato gun and this car, a brand new spanking new car, and eventually leave him a note. It's like from the mechanic, and Harley's like, yeah, like, yeah, like all this cool stuff and like all this stuff that I can use. So Tony goes off and is to also finally solve the problem of his heart by going ahead and having these doctors eventually take out all this shrapnel from his heart so that way he doesn't have to have this arc reactor in his chest anymore. But in other films, we eventually have him still have this variation of this arc reactor, but it's like it's a thing that he can take off at some point instead of having it still be attached to him. So, and we never actually get to see what Tony's chest now looks like without this arc reactor on it. I'm assuming it has to look like a normal chest. You would think there'd be some kind of like massive scar or whatever there, but so Tony is to have all this shrapnel removed and he is to sleep really well. And so he is to, of course, go on and eventually make it back to his place and eventually take the dunce robot and the other robot and are to say, it's like, well, hey, like, I thought that like, for me to be a hero I had to be Iron Man, and that like, I had to be in the suit, and like, I had to have this my home and my my everything. Now I realize that like now Tony's to realize that he doesn't need any of that stuff to still be Iron Man. And so, really, that's the real consensus that he makes there. And so, Tony is to go on before he leaves his uh, torn away home, which we don't see what happens really after that because we just have Tony who's either in the Avengers compound or just anywhere else that the Avengers are to be. Tony's to be in the further along movies. We don't actually see where he like rebuilds a home or anything like that. We see him in a cabin later on in some other film. But so Tony goes and takes his arc reactor and chucks it into the water and then walks away. And like that's just how the movie is just to rattle off. And we of course end up having the one end credit scene that I think is to God, what is the end credit scene for this one? I think that probably is to be God, what is that? What is the end credit scene? I don't remember for this one. Like I don't think it really matters anyways. What it is. I don't know what the end credit scene was for this one. I should, because I watched it. Uh, anyways, yeah, I don't remember what it was. So, with that said, I think that does cover this movie, and holy crap, that took a really long freaking time to review this thing. I think it took just as long as the movie, and I'm like, oh my god. So I'm going to get the heck out of here. Goodbye, everybody. I didn't realize this was going to take that long. It's probably even longer than the freaking film. I'm sorry. This is a lot to talk about. There's a lot of stuff to unpack, so I'm going to unpack my way out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.